must be tired of waiting. It's time to unleash your power. I'm about to risk everything here. If I lose, the cards in the G-Zone will never return. But I said if, and it just ain't gonna happen.
What do you mean by that?
This is what I mean. It's time to manifest yourself, Zeroth, Dragon of Dragon Empire! Ultimate Stride! Zeroth, Dragon of Inferno! Drachma!
Hey guys, welcome back for another video on the channel. I do apologize, I know this video is almost 2 days old now. I tried to get this video done for you guys last night. However, for some reason my audio did not want to record correctly, so I'm having to do it this way instead. So I hope everything sounds okay to you guys. If not, I guess I'll be redoing this for a third time. I'd really rather not, but I will. But anyway, so I don't want to spend too much time on the intro, so let's go ahead and get right into the video for the day. Today, I want to talk about the new boss card for the season, Dragon Deity of Destruction, Gyze. Over the last 2 days, the more I've talked about it with people online, the more I've looked at it myself, the options on how to deal with it and all that good stuff. I've come to a lot of conclusions about the card. I've changed my mind on a lot of things multiple times. But I just want to give my thoughts on it. I've seen a lot of people just immediately react, jump to, you know, each one of the bandwagons saying it's good, saying it's garbage. But I want to give my opinions on it, how I think it's going to go, how I think it's going to impact the game. Now, first things first, I do want to go ahead and say that for the duration of this video, when I talk about these things, think about it as... look at it from the standpoint of optimal situation, maximum usage of the card. Granted, you're not always going to have it that way, but I just want to look at it that way. It just makes things a lot easier to explain. Okay, so if you guys haven't seen this card already, let's go ahead and kind of jump into it. If I can find... Okay, alright. So Dragon Deity of Destruction, Gyze, our new Grade 4 Stride unit for the season. Immediately, if you'll notice, it has the 30,000 power, but it does not have the plus. This is not a misprint. This is actually a thing. And because basically its effect will cause this to be a thing, which we'll explain here in just a second. But immediately notice that it is a Cray Elemental, so you'll be able to put this card into any deck. With a base power of 30,000 again. So, I mean, this will be the first time we have had a card of 30,000 power. That's pretty significant on from an offensive standpoint, just because it is the highest number that a Stride is able to hit on a base level. But let's go ahead and get into the card's effect, and we'll go from there. Alright, so Gyze's ability is auto. When this unit is placed on Vanguard Circle, choose 5 Zeroth Dragons from your bind zone, call them to separate rearguard. Okay, so when you immediately look at this first effect, it basically says choose 5 of your Zeroth Dragons. I mean, it's pretty basic. It's all right there. Choose 5 and call them to rearguard. So basically what this card is going to allow you to do is run all of your Zeroth Dragons in your side deck, or extra deck, I mean. But the thing is, it's, you know, well, as you all know, there's actually 6, but you only have to have 5, including this card. So you only actually need 5, so you won't have to get all 6, which is a good thing. But the problem I'm seeing is it does say from the bind zone, so now we have to have a way to get them into the bind zone. So let's go ahead and look at the second ability. Continuous Vanguard, you cannot ride or call rear guards other than Zeroth Dragons. All of your units do not return to your G-Zone and are unaffected by any influence other than deal 1 damage to your opponent's Vanguard for each Zeroth Dragon on your rearguard circle. So that's pretty significant in the fact that if you really look at what the card does... so basically what this card is saying is your card, Gyze will never return to the G-Zone, so once you stride it, it's basically there forever. Now, what that also means is your Zeroth Dragons won't return either. So basically, once he's in play, that's all you will ever be able to have in play. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. The only downside is the 3 Zeroth Dragons in the back row can't boost. It doesn't give them the boost ability. So they're basically just there for looks. But when you have 25k rear guards in your front row, and then Gyze at a 30 base in your front, that's kind of the least of your issues. You're already attacking for big numbers. And then the fact that his third ability, basically at the beginning of your turn, you get to deal a damage for each Zeroth Dragon. That's pretty significant because if they're completely unaffected, they cannot be attacked. Basically, at the start of your turn, if your opponent doesn't win on the turn after you stride Gyze, they take 5 damage. And, I mean, let's be honest, the game's pretty much over at that point. There's not much chance your opponent's going to heal that much. Even if they do manage to heal, it's going into your turn. You'll still have your attacks. And then you basically, I mean, even if they do, you know, if you're not able to finish them on your turn, your opponent's going to be in a tight spot because they know for a fact, regardless, they have to win on that next turn. Otherwise, it's still game. Because at that point, there's definitely no way they're going to heal because they're not going to be able to reshuffle that many heal triggers back into the deck between the time of you starting your turn and them only having one extra turn in between to try to reset. So this card's effect is pretty significant in the fact that it doesn't really provide an offensive effect, but it's a defensive effect. Which again is pretty unique in Vanguard because again we have a card that cannot leave the Vanguard circle. It's a permanent stride, so that's the first of its kind. And then the fact that it will allow you to play all of your Zeroth Dragons. And then it forms essentially an invincible wall. No matter what your opponent does, they can't kill your Zeroth Dragons under any circumstances. They can't do anything to them. The only problem is just from the wording alone, it basically means you can't target any of your cards with triggers at that point either. So it pretty much, you look at it as an offensive stand base. Gyze himself has no offensive capability. He takes away all of your Zeroth Dragons' offensive capabilities. Obviously, you're not going to be using any of their effects, but the issue here is the fact that you can't target them with the triggers. You'll still get your draw, you'll still get your heal, but that's pretty much it. You won't get to stand, you won't get your criticals. None of that matters. And this goes for defensive as well. Since Gyze's in play, they can't be targeted or affected in any way other than himself and Guardians. It basically makes it where as long as your opponent's breaking that 30k base, they don't have to worry about defensive triggers. They can just attack you as many times as they want, and there's nothing you can do about it. So as far as offensive goes, this card is no good offensively. But it shines in its defense with having that 30k base, because even on a generic stride at 26, they still can't hit. It would be extremely simple for a Gyze player just to drop a 10k shield and go 3 or no pass. It just creates a really awkward situation where you have an insanely good defense, but absolutely no offense. However, there is one other surprise with this card that I wanted to bring up in the fact that it does have a starter form with Neon Gyze, which, surprisingly, we've come to find out is a double-sided card. So on one side you'll have the starter, the grade 0, and then when it flips, it turns into the stride Gyze. This card, Neon Gyze, will basically be your starter for the deck. He says, when this unit is ridden, put this card into your G zone. It does not count for Generation Break. So this is significant because a lot of people were initially starting to think that if it goes into your G zone, it automatically enables Generation Break 1 on your first turn. But this text basically corrects that and makes sure there's no misunderstanding there. Its second effect, continuous G zone. The power increase from your trigger effects changes to choose up to 1 zeroth dragon from your G zone and bind it face up. Again, here's another effect that basically takes away trigger effects, but this is the key effect that even allows the deck to even be played. So basically what's going to happen is every time you hit a trigger throughout the entire game, instead of getting the power effect, you'll bind one of the zeroth dragons from the extra deck. And then once you hit the required 5 that Gyze states, you'll be able to stride into Gyze using the starter when it flips. Now this in and of itself, again, is one of those things where it doesn't have any offensive capability, and in this situation it actually doesn't have any defensive capability either. You'll still be able to target your cards with the secondary trigger effects, so that you'll still get your critical stands, draws, heals, but you won't get any of the power. And since it is continuous G-zone effect, that effect technically goes away the minute you stride. However, Gyze himself basically has another rendition of this effect. So pretty much your triggers are null and void throughout the entire game if you intend to play Gyze. Now, its third effect, continuous G-zone, your zeroth dragons in the bind zone cannot be moved to another location. This effect is significant for decks like Murakuma, Nobatama, which like to play around with bound cards and whatnot. It's basically making sure that they can't touch it, they can't touch them, they can't interfere with the strategy. The only thing here is, though, keep in mind that it does say your zeroth dragons in the bind zone can't be moved to another location. So that it really only protects them. And since Neon Gyze is in the extra deck, you don't have to worry about anything bothering him. So basically, they're going to protect each other with it's kind of like a soft net protection until Gyze hits the field. And then, as you'll notice, unlike Gyze did not have the stride clause or for his ultimate stride, but it's actually on Neon Gyze. The only thing that immediately caught my eye was, if you notice, right, where is it? Okay, yeah, if you'll notice right here, released when your Vanguard is grade 3 and the number of different zeroth dragon in your bind zone is 5. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying. You have to have 5 to activate this effect. But notice the big thing is here is where it says when your Vanguard is grade 3. Unlike most stride units where your opponent also has to be at grade 3, Gyze does not require your opponent to be at grade 3. Now again, let's look at it from an optimal standpoint. Let's assume you go first. So you hit a defensive trigger. You start your turn, hit a trigger. You get another trigger on your defensive turn. You go into your grade 3. Your opponent may get 1 stride at the most before Gyze hits the field. But optimally, I mean, it's still possible if your opponent tries to rush, you get to Gyze before they even hit grade 3. There is the possibility, granted the chances of this actually happening on a consistent basis is extremely low, but the possibility is there. So always keep that in mind. Unfortunately, the fact that you do have to run this as your starter, you do kind of telegraph what you're playing, how you're going to try to play your turns. So your opponent does have that information. So they do have the opportunity and the chance to try to play around this card's effect. They probably won't try to rush you if they don't have the ability to try to rush you to end the game before Gyze is even possible. Or, if they see 3 triggers, they might back off a little bit just in case. But if you're not hitting your triggers, then they can just rush you to death. And, because obviously you're not going to be able to use Gyze if you don't hit the required 5 triggers. And then basically, as I stated while talking about Gyze himself, once you stride, you remove all cards on your circles in your soul and G-zone, turn this card face down and stride it. So basically you flip it and stride it. But the significant part is you remove all of your other cards on your circles. So this will get rid of locked cards. It will get rid of anything that's on your circles, no matter what. So it's basically, there's no way your opponent's going to be able to delay the effect in any way or try to limit it just by trying to hurt what's already in play at that time. But it does get rid of your soul. It does actually kill the Vanguard, and it gets rid of your G-Zone. The G-Zone being gone at this point is what's significant about this card. And the fact that once you stride into Gyze, you're pretty much locked out of any other strides. You're locked out of G-Guards. You have no more defensive ability other than the cards in your hand. Now, I know what you're probably thinking, why is that significant? Well, it's really only significant against a single card. And we'll get to that a little bit later on. But now that we've gone over both of the Gyze cards, I want to go ahead and start talking about matchups. And this is where I'll start talking about my opinion on the matchups and how well I think each card's going to do based on like some of the current meta stuff and how well I think this card's going to perform. So let's go ahead and start with the most consistent way of dealing with the Gyze. With that card being this one right here, Death Star Vader, Chaos Breaker, Deluge. Now this card is significant in the fact that it actually does provide a consistent counter effect. It's one of the rulings where it's kind of that gray area where it actually gets around Gyze's protection in a really awkward way. Now this was confirmed in the official FAQ that was released. Now that may change. I mean, it's known to happen. They released something by mistake. It's happened. But until we've seen that, this is what you have to kind of go by, and it works by the wording, because this would be certainly how I would have to call it. But with Deluge's effect, you basically get to force your opponent to choose 2 cards from their hand and put them on separate rearguard as locked cards. Gyze only protects the cards themselves. So Deluge technically targets the circles, and then you're forced to place cards to that circle. Not necessarily retire, not necessarily call, but place. So it's placement effects that are the key to beating Gyze. Because again, if you can't deal with Gyze the turn after they stride it on the next turn, you're gonna take 5 damage. Deluge gives you the most optimal way of dealing with Gyze. That with it being able to get rid of 2 of the Zeroth Dragons in 1 turn. The problem here, and the reason that I still think that Gyze is a great card, is even against Deluge, it is a once per turn. And a hard once per turn. And then the fact that it is Generation Break 3, so it's going to take some setup to be able to use this as quickly as possible. And then it is Soul Blast, and then flipping a card. Not to mention also having a discard from your hand. So if the Gyze player is able to apply enough pressure, if they force you to kind of burn through your soul too quickly, Deluge may not be able to work. But it does form the backbone of like the most consistent way to deal with Gyze's effects. Again, as I said, it's a once per turn, but when you consider that you're guaranteed to get rid of 2 of them, you're only taking 3 damage. 3 is significantly less than 5. It's still not great, but it's still doable considering that the other card that Link Joker has with this guy, which this guy right here, Star Vader. I'm not even going to pronounce this name, but basically he has the same effect as the other guy. This guy, Deluge. Couldn't think of his name for a second. But basically, instead of a Soul Blast, you Counter Blast. As long as you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Star Vader in its card name. Obviously, you are, because you're playing Deluge. Plus, he'll actually get power. And then, for Counter Blast 1, you get the same effect as Deluge. But for 1 card. So if you can hold on to 2 copies of this, or 3 if you've got the 3 Counter Blasts, you could potentially take out all of your opponent's Zeroth Dragons before they ever get used. And because Gyze is still in play, your opponent still can't call. So even though their field is empty, they still can't do anything. And then all they have is Gyze, which does 0 damage. And then because Gyze can't give himself triggers, as long as you can drop 20k shield exactly every single turn, your opponent will never hit you. And at that point, it's just an easy win at that point, or you just wait for the Gyze player to deck out. because they are going to get 3 drive checks every turn that just don't do anything. So they don't even have the option to stay at a grade 3 and only get 2 checks and try to delay the deck out. It's just going to happen. So again, the combination between Deluge and this guy are your more consistent ways of doing it. The other 2 options we have are Mega Colony cards, the slightly newer Boss Monster 4 Mega Colony with Evil Governor Darkface Gridora. Your new Boss 3, basically, the effect that we need to look at here is not necessarily and I cannot get my computer mouse to work. Anyway, so the effect we're not really concerned about is the Generation Break 1, the ability to steal Counterblast. That's not important. But what is important is the first ability where it's Counterblast 1. Well, once per turn, Counterblast 1 when this unit is placed on Vanguard or when your G unit strides, you may pay the cost. If you do, choose a column and your opponent cannot call cards to the rear guard in that column during the next turn. Now that's significant because it does give you the ability to effectively have infinite counterblasts. So this ability will essentially always be online. And then basically what that's going to do is it's going to give you the ability to lock a column, or not lock, but make a column completely unusable. And even though Gyze protects, it doesn't protect the circles themselves. So since you can't call to 2 of those circles, your opponent would lose 2 Zeroth dragons. And then because they obviously can't be moved around the board freely, your opponent only has a maximum of 2 attacks every turn. But this is still significant in the fact that it does reduce Gyze's ability to deal damage by 2. So you basically can guarantee that your opponent can only deal 3 damage. Now this is the easiest and most effective and guaranteed way of stopping Gyze. The problem is you're not going to be able to do anything after Gyze gets in play. You're still going to take a guaranteed 3 every turn. Now, I know what you're thinking, is there just a card that just stops Gyze altogether? Well, the answer is simple, yes. The secondary card for Mega Colony, one of their slightly older Stride units with Lawless Mutant Deity Obiturandus. Most people probably already know this card and what it does, but for those that don't, I will go ahead and explain the effect. You can also see it on screen. Activate Vanguard Generation Break 2, so it's slightly better than Generation Break 3. Counterblast 2, choose a card from your hand and discard it. Your opponent cannot call his or her units to rearguard until the end of your opponent's next turn. Now that's significant because, again, if Gyze can't call the cards, he enters the battlefield by himself. And then your opponent has no Zeroth dragons. Now the problem is, keep in mind that always the Gyze player simply doesn't have to go into Gyze. Now they're still not going to get their trigger effects because Neon Gyze stops them from getting triggers. Well, it doesn't necessarily stop them, but you know what I mean. It stops them from getting the powers, or the power boosts. But this card does allow an easy way of making sure that Gyze, you basically stop him for an entire turn. Your opponent's not going to stride Gyze knowing that that they were hit with this effect, because Gyze would effectively be useless. They would have only 1 attack every turn. They would deal no damage every turn, and Obiturandus is definitely the absolute answer. The only reason I don't like him in this situation is because it is, again, 2 counterblast to do it. Your opponent simply can choose not to go into Gyze. They can, if you're playing Gyze and Overlord, you just stick with Overlord. You just, you stride into Ziegenberg and the Purge and stuff like that. So your opponent will always have to be, as long as they're intelligent enough to know that you're playing Mega Colony, to know that this is a potential card, and to watch for this effect, your opponent can play around this. And then the fact that even if you get to Generation Break 2, if you get to the point where you can use this card's ability, it is a heavy counterblast too. Not to mention it's discarding cards from your hand, which you're not going to hear an Overlord player complain about. you're not going to hear, Neonectar players complain about, because they're going to hit you with big numbers. Less cards in your hand means less chances you're going to be able to block. Now, what's significant is the fact that, again, it's Counterblast 2, so if your opponent waits you out a turn or two, chances are you're not going to be able to do a whole lot. But again, Overtrandus is kind of like your win-all kind of situation card. Now, through the ruling situation with Gyze, there is one other card I want to talk about before we move on. And again, because of the way that Gyze works, this card, it's an older card, but it does guarantee you an absolute win if your opponent plays Gyze. And that card being the old favorite Shadow Paladin card, none other than Dark Dragon, Phantom Blaster, Diablo. Now, everybody pretty much remembers this card being from the Blaster Dark Legend deck that was released a couple of years ago. But basically what he does is he guarantees the win because of his effect. Auto Vanguard, once per turn, Counterblast 1, choose a face-down card named Dark Dragon, Phantom Blaster, Diablo from your G-Zone, turn it face up. If the number of face-up cards in your G-Zone is 2 or more, until the end of this turn, this unit gets 10,000 power, critical +1, and Auto Vanguard, choose 3 of your rear guards, retire them. When this unit attacks a Vanguard, you may pay the cost. If you do, your opponent may choose 2 of his or her rear guards and retire them. If two rear guards were not retired, your opponent cannot call cards from hand to guard circle until the end of that battle. Now, here again is the key wording. Since you cannot retire your Zeroth Dragons because the Gyze protects them even from yourself, you cannot pay the cost for to guard against this attack. And because Gyze removes your entire G-Zone from the game, you do not have access to any sort of G-Guards or anything of that nature. So essentially, and because you're already at a 26k base, you add the 10k power, that's 36, plus it's going to have the crit. You cannot block this attack. He hits you and it's an automatic loss. Now, the key thing is, again, it is kind of a generation break too, with there having to be 2 face up or more. But it's easy for your opponent to just G-Guard on your first attack just to make sure that this card is always online. And even if they don't G-Guard, the fact is, again, you're not always going to hit your 5 triggers immediately. So sometimes your opponent's going to get to stride once. And then once they do, this card is always live. Especially if they're playing Blaster Dark Diablo, in the fact that he makes all of the cards in your hand effectively grade 3s. So your opponent's going to always have a stride cost. Don't doubt that fact. Now, let's assume that it's not, and that this card is just being teched into another deck specifically to deal with Gyze. There are still some varied situations where this card still can't get the job done. Mostly, and it's really only the fact that it does require you to kill 3 of your own rear guards. If you can't do that, then this card cannot beat Gyze either. But therein lies actually the specialty of the card, because it is only Counterblast 1, so it's not Counterblast heavy. But the downside is it is flip a copy of himself. So unless your opponent only wants one good go at this card, they're going to have to run this at 4 just to counter Gyze. Now, if they get you to 5 and they hit you and they manage to drive check 1 or 2 crits, it's pretty much guaranteed that the game is over. But let's assume the Gyze player manages to heal to 3 damage. You get your 2 crit and you check no criticals. You put the Gyze player at 5 and you only ran 2 of this card. You're out of options. Now Gyze is just going to turn around and punch you in the face. Nice try. Get off my yard. Get out of my lawn, basically. So again, it's a varied situation of what could possibly happen, what would happen. But as far as cards that immediately have come to my attention that kind of interact well with Gyze, that's pretty much it. Just these 4. Well, 5 actually, because 4 counter Diablo effectively is an automatic win. Depending on the situation, you know, Gyze can still heal, they just won't get power. And because the guard restrict is only for his battle, once that battle's over, your opponent's free to, you know, finish guarding with the cards from their hand. And at a 30k base, even if you hit all 3 triggers, your other rear guards just aren't going to be swinging for an insane amount of power. So again, very situational. But now my overview on Gyze himself. Gyze himself is going to be an amazing card. Do I think it's busted or too good? Absolutely not. Because again, it is a heavy cost of having to have all 5 Zeroth Dragons, being able to bind them all by hitting 5 triggers. He takes away your ability to basically have triggers. So you're basically playing half Vanguard. So it's a heavy cost, a heavy sacrifice, just for a guaranteed amount of damage that your opponent has a chance to deal with. So in my opinion, honestly, it's not a great card. It's not a garbage card. It's actually quite average. Now, is that to say that it won't be a meta thing? It's very possible that it will be. A lot of people do look at this card and just immediately yell broken. Because they only look at the fact that it is deal 5 damage. That's basically all they're looking at. Deal 5 damage. And you simply can't look at the card as simply deal 5 damage. That's not how the card works. So there's going to be the situations where it does get run. It will be used correctly. Now, and of course, and always keep in mind, with Gyze being in his own pack, and at most it's going to be one copy per case, you're probably not going to see a lot of this card running around. Because if you're not lucky enough to pull it from the case, that means you're dropping a lot of money. Because a lot of people struggle just to buy the 1 Zeroth Dragon that they need for whatever deck they're running at that moment. Much less buying 5 and then buying Gyze. Now I'd like to hope that because you only have to have 1 of the Gyze and it already has the starter, so it's not like you have to have 2 cards, because it is a double-sided card. Again, the problem is, I think that the overhype is going to cause his price to be just as ridiculous as the Zeroth Dragons. So we're looking at easily a $200 card when it releases, possibly even $250 even. In Vanguard we've seen weirder things happen. So be prepared for that. So it's not like you're going to see locals, everybody running this card. It's just not going to happen. Regionals, Worlds next year, probably not going to see any of it, because by then there will be enough newer stuff from the new series that probably completely makes Gyze irrelevant. Bushy may even ban Gyze, restrict it in some way, give it an Etera. Only time will tell, depending on how it goes for the moment. But for the foreseeable future, I just don't see this card being competitive. Not like 100%. It's not going to be, oh, hey, we absolutely have to play this card and we win. That's just not how it's going to go. But it's going to be a card that you're going to have to know exists, and you're going to have to know how to play around. And for Mega Colony, you're probably already running Obatyrannus anyway, because it's just a great card. For Chaos Breaker, you're already running Deluge because it's a great card. Shadow Paladin Blasters, I believe that this card the Diablo was already teched at 1 or 2 copies anyway. So you already have all the decks that need to have the tools already run them. So it's not like it's going to force people to change their decks at all. Really, not really. But it may force decks like Aquaforce, decks like Nova Grappler, Dimension Police, decks that typically use multiple attacks. They may need to tune the deck to be a little bit faster, to be a little bit more early game focused, to try to rush Gyze's damage, to try to burn out your opponent's hand, to try to win the game before Gyze effectively hits the field anyway. Nova Grapplers is getting extremely consistent with being able to hit multiple attacks with multiple units that have varying effects that allow them to restand, gain more power, and attack with quite considerable numbers. So Nova Grapplers are going to be able to deal with this deck fine. Thavis, which has been competitive for a while now, will deal with this card fine. They have a lot of early game pressure, and that's going to be like the key to beating Gyze, in my opinion, is just being able to pour on early game pressure and being able to do the necessary amount of damage needed to effectively make this card not as good as people want it to be. And I don't think that's going to be hard to do. So my closing arguments for the card are going to be simple. Not broken, not garbage, not necessarily competitive. It's possible, but not likely. But Gyze himself is going to be an extremely fun card to just play around, have a good time with. It's an insanely gimmicky thing. It's a new mechanic coming into the game. So it's going to be something to look forward to, for sure. Me personally, I see it as a challenge to try to figure out new ways to play, hoping to face this card. Because as a competitive player, you want to be able to, see how you stack up against an incredibly powerful card like this. Can you beat this card when it comes out, or beat it before it comes out? So I think it's going to, provide a good challenge for people to try to overcome. But I don't think in the long run it's going to be impossible to achieve. So guys, that is my analysis of Dragon Deity of Destruction Gyze, how to counter it, what you should counter it with, and my overall opinion on how the card is going to affect the game. So if you guys enjoyed the video, hit the like button. If you guys want to stay informed on all of my upcoming videos, I want to start doing more videos like this on all the upcoming cards. I want to make some for the new Chronovisor Heritage, all the new Zodiac Time Beast support. So if you guys want to stay up to date on all of my videos, make sure you subscribe to the channel for all future videos. If you guys have any comments or anything you'd like for me to do, please feel free to let me know in the comments. I'll check the comments as much as possible. So if there's any kind of videos, any kind of deck reviews, any kind of matches that you'd like to do, I have a lot of friends. We could probably do some matches and whatnot. We used to do them in the past, but due to restraints, we couldn't do it as much as we used to. But still very much of an option. So whatever you guys really want to see out of our channel, just let us know in the comments, and we'll definitely work with it. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Sorry it took so long. But for a card like Gyze, I knew it was going to take some time to go over everything. So I hope you guys managed to stick around for the whole video. Again, hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you guys in the next video.